Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're just going to give it a minute as everybody's logging in today. It is so wonderful to see you. Welcome, everybody. We're going to give it one more minute. We have over 200 people registered for this webinar today, and we're so excited to have this opportunity to come together to talk a bit about clinical practice. So thank you so much for your patience as everybody's logging on. If you are in a space where you are safe to be on camera, we would love to see you. It is always so wonderful to be amongst colleagues and friends. If you are in a space where you are driving or something like that, though, we absolutely understand if you cannot be on camera. And so, but for those of you who can, it's always wonderful to see you. Good morning. My name is Renee Marshall. I'm an administrator here at the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and we are really excited to be bringing this webinar today. Our team has been planning this for a while, and we're just excited that today is the day. So just want to remind everybody who's on a couple quick things before we get kicked off. We still have people entering the wait room, and we're going to be adding them as we go. Want to share with everybody that we have a slide deck today, but please know with this slide deck, we are going to be dropping it in the chat towards the end of the webinar. We will also make sure that we post it and have it available on the PK-3 website, and we will share it on PSD News, things like that. We'll get the word out to everybody, but please know that. We also wanted to make sure that everybody knows that this webinar is specifically developed or has been specifically developed for those of you that are offering teacher credentialing programs. So like, for instance, if you are somebody who is a current preschool teacher and you're like, wait a second, I want to learn about clinical practice and how it relates to me. This webinar, unfortunately, I'm just being honest here, it's really not designed for you. This webinar is designed for those who are creating teacher credentialing programs. So we want to make sure we get that message across from the start. We know that this is going to be an incredibly rich webinar today. Our slides are pretty dense. There's a lot of information, everybody. Please know that that was absolutely intentional. We're going to cover as much as we can during the webinar today, but we're going to make sure that everybody has the slide deck and has access to it. We also want to assure you that our teams are available to meet if there's any questions. We have two teams that are on today. Our initial program review IPR team is on today, and our early childhood education team is here as well. We have office hours coming up next week for both of those teams. We'll drop those in the chat later on. We're also available for meetings, even as we're getting close to holidays and New Year's, or if you want to wait till the start of the new year, we want to let you know that we are here. We are excited to work for you. We're so excited for these programs to be developed, and we are here to support you. But we do want to give you a heads up. This is a rich webinar. If you are in one of those moments where you're trying to double or triple task in multiple meetings, this one is going to be, it's going to be a hard one to do that with. This is going to be one that if you can be present, please be present today, because like we said, it's a lot of information. We also wanted to let everyone know that we are going to try our best to answer as many questions as possible. And we're going to encourage you to put any questions that you have in the chat. We are not going to be unmuting for questions because we know with the duration of the slides and the amount of people on that, we don't think that's going to be feasible today. So we're going to try our best to answer everything we can, but I'm always human. I think those of you who know me well know this. I am a human being. And the reality is we're going to try to answer as much as we can. And there might be questions that we don't know the answers to on this second. And if there are any questions that elevate that are like that, where we don't know the answers, we will commit to you that we will get the answers and we will bring them back to you. We are in the process of updating the PK-3 FAQ page, and that is anticipated to be reposted on our website, hopefully by the end of 2023. That's our goal. And so, but please know that that is a living and breathing document. And if there's additional questions at this webinar that are not addressed today, we will make sure to do our best to get those added to the webinar, to the FAQ that gets posted. We are trying our best to present as much information as possible. So one thing though, if anybody has any program specific questions today, we're going to ask that you hold off on those for either office hours or for one-on-one meetings. And but if you have general questions that most of the people who are going to be on are going to find that they're going to be relevant for them, we please encourage you to ask those questions in the chat today. So with that, Debbie, if we could go ahead and open up our slides for everybody, that would be great. And I am going to hand it over to Cheryl now. And thank you again, everybody, so much for being here. We are very excited to be together today, and we appreciate you spending the time with us.
I think we were sending it to Bronwyn, were we not?
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Sorry, Cheryl. Let's send it over to see the humanity comes out within 5 minutes, right? Progress, not perfection. That's my mantra. So let's hand it over.
There we go.
Okay, so today's agenda is we're going to go slightly over the program requirements for the PK-3 ECE Specialist Instruction Credential. We're going to review the clinical practice. We're going to go over requirements and the components of clinical practice and the residency and intern requirements and equivalency options. And with that, I will send it to Cheryl.
Great. Hi, everybody. I am Cheryl Hickey. I am one of the administrators in the Professional Services Division, primarily doing accreditation, but I also do policy in general. So I'm really thrilled to be with you this morning. We wanted to give you a couple of basic slides. We know that we have with us today people who are very familiar with the Commission's accreditation system, with our program approval process, and we have people with us that aren't so familiar. They may be from divisions within your institution that have not traditionally provided teacher preparation that's approved by the Commission. So just wanted to spend a couple of minutes this morning kind of talking through some of our general structure or our requirements. As you know, educator preparation programs are designed to prepare future educators. You're all in that business to build the understanding of teaching and learning competencies. And so it really is the place that you take the content that you've learned. Typically, a candidate learns that in their undergraduate program and connects it theory to practice, learns how to teach. So of course, that is, you know, the main driver of teacher preparation programs. You're all in that business. But for the Commission, for both program approval, like initial program approval, where we are approving all licensed programs in California, and particularly these are the PK-3 credentials, and for continued accreditation, there are sort of some basic foundational structures. So we have preconditions, common standards, program standards, and performance expectations. And these 4 components are common across every kind of credential area you can imagine. The exception to that are performance expectations. Not all areas yet have performance expectations, but as we move and update standards, we are building in performance expectations. So preconditions, let's go through these just quickly. Preconditions are usually statutory requirements or there's some sort of Commission policy. These are areas that are not negotiable. They are what we would call our compliance areas. They are things that a program has to do. So an example of that is before you recommend a candidate for a teaching credential, they must meet the subject matter requirement. It's in law. And so therefore you have to do that. So there are those kinds of things. There's no wiggle room. You can't say, well, my program is designed a little bit differently. These are things that we need to see just straight up. The common standards are standards approved by the Commission that are basically about your institution and how your institution is going to support the credential program. When you propose a PK-3 credential, basically the common standards are where does that program fit in your overall institution and with other credential programs that you offer? What is the governance structure? Who's in charge? What are the reporting relationships? What are the resources that are going to support this new program? And what is, what are your qualifications for your faculty? So there are those big topics that are related to the institution at large, not necessarily specifically for the program, but for the institution at large. And then, of course, we have program standards, and those are specific to the type of credential that is being offered. And those are very specific. The Commission determines where, what's in the credential area based on what that person is will be authorized to do. And then, of course, we have the performance expectations. And those are, what does a candidate need to do and demonstrate to be, we'll say, classroom ready, to be a new novice educator. These 4 areas are really important for you to know, and clinical practice, as we talk about today, is embedded in some fashion in all of these areas. So you'll see it woven throughout. There's a little bit of it in preconditions. There's a little bit of it in common standards. There's a lot of it in program standards. And of course, the teacher performance expectations, this is where they demonstrate. So clinical practice is the key area where they demonstrate those expectations. Okay, next slide. Most of you are aware of this, but just quickly going through, there are different types of educator preparation programs, and you are free to design your program as you choose to do so. So there's your traditional student teaching, which is your post-baccalaureate, 1 to 2 years generally. There's the integrated teacher preparation program, and we know that we're seeing a lot of these for PK-3. The candidate is earning both the baccalaureate degree and the credential in less than 5 years. And these are intentionally integrated. So you have the content and the pedagogy integrated together closely. You have the residencies, which of course, many of you are involved in residency programs in other credential areas now. And this is a type of student teaching, but it is really that the candidate is assigned to a classroom for the entire year, about 50% of the time, and it is a post-baccalaureate program. So the first 3 of these with the arrows, the first 3 are student teaching pathways. And then we have the intern pathway. The candidate completes a pre-service, they need to be prepared, but the difference is here they are the teacher of record, and they serve on a document that is issued by the commission. They complete the coursework and assessments in their own classroom. There are very specific supervision requirements on clinical practice here, and we'll go into more detail on that. Okay, next slide, and I'm going to toss it over to the next person, who I don't remember who it is. Sorry.
That would be me.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Cheryl. Good morning, everybody. Bronwyn Kennedy. I am a consultant here in the professional services division, and I work with this beautiful team on the screen here. We're going to go over the requirements for a PK-3 ECE specialist instruction credential for those of you that are planning this in your programs. A bachelor's or higher degree from a regionally accredited institution of higher education is required. Subject matter requirement. The subject matter requirement for this credential requires 24 units in ECE or child development, or a bachelor's degree or above in one of 9 specific majors. Those majors are child development, child and adolescent development, human development, early childhood education, child and family studies, early childhood studies, family science, human development and family science, or child, adolescent, and family studies. Also, a completion of a commission-approved preliminary PK-3 ECE specialist instruction credential program, and we've outlined what that program should look like here on this slide. Passage of a commission-approved teaching performance assessment, and also passage of a RICA or literacy performance assessment. Next slide, please. The standards for the PK-3 ECE specialist instruction credential is a listing of 9 program standards for the PK-3. As you can see, clinical practice is a core element of the program and is outlined in detail in program standard 3. All programs must demonstrate how their clinical practice is integrated into the program. And again, these slides will be available for you, so you'll be able to look at this more intensely. And I'll pass it on to the next person.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rosemary Wren, and I'm a consultant here at the Commission, and I work on the initial program review team, and I've been able to work with the PK-3 credential. So we just want to emphasize to you that clinical practice for this credential is a developmental and sequential set of activities that's integrated with theoretical and pedagogical coursework, and it consists of a minimum of 600 hours. And this is not an elective, as you saw in the previous slide. It is part of the program, of the preparation program. And it includes supervised early field experiences, initial supervised student teaching, and final supervised student teaching, including 4 weeks solo or co-teaching or its equivalent. So it is a key element of the program. And so we're going to go a little deeper into the different elements. And I'll pass it off to Debbie.
Thank you, Rosemary. Debbie Keeler, consultant with the Commission on Teacher Credentialing in the Professional Services Division on the ECE team. It's my honor to talk a little bit about the clinical practice requirements and the hours that are needed for this area of the credential. So clinical practice requirements for this credential is a minimum of 600 hours. And there are three elements to these 600 hours. The first is 200 hours in a PK or a TK setting. The next is 200 hours in a K-3 setting. And the final area is 200 hours in the choice of PK through 3rd grade setting. So I'm going to hand it off to Erin.
Good morning, everyone. Erin Sullivan. I'm an administrator in the Professional Services Division. So I think maybe you're starting to really understand here how key clinical practice is in these programs, right? There are a variety of activities that candidates need to do. There are a variety of experiences that they need to have, and it's very important to them. So I get to talk a little bit about sort of the human elements that are involved in this clinical practice piece that these candidates are going to complete that's going to be so enriching for them. So clinical practice really represents a triad of individuals. You have your teacher candidates, of course. Then you also have at your own programs a clinical practice supervisor of some kind that works at your institution. And then in addition to that, these individuals are going to have somebody at their school site in the classrooms where they're completing their clinical practice that is going to be their mentor or their collaborating teacher. And these three individuals make up a very important triad that is going to, as you see at the bottom here, the university supervisor and the LEA supervisor, they really create that base of support for these teacher candidates as they learn and practice their skills as a teacher. Next slide, please. So the university or program supervisor is somebody that is going to be selected by the institution. And this person is going to be, supervising, providing guidance to these candidates during clinical practice. But as you saw, also working with the LEA supervisors that are at the school sites. So they become really the main link between the program and not only the candidate, I think, which is obvious, but these mentors or co-teachers, or I'm sorry, supervisors that are working with these candidates at their school sites. Your university supervisors are going to provide critical feedback, guidance, support. They're going to work with the candidates on reflections. Some of these main things the mentors will do as well, but so there are lots of opportunities for these folks to support the candidates. They will need to be completing some formal observations for the candidates during the program. And the requirement is that for these candidates, while they're completing clinical practice, if you operate on a semester system, then your university supervisor will be completing at least 6 observations, formal observations per semester. And if you're on a quarter system, then your university supervisors will complete a minimum of 4 formal observations per quarter. Next slide, please. Okay, in addition, your university supervisor needs to have some minimum requirements so that we can be assured that they really understand the work that these candidates are going to be doing, the program that they're working in, and that they are very qualified to be working with these candidates in their clinical practice. So for the university supervisor, the program will need to ensure that this person has a California teaching credential, or that they hold a master teacher level or higher of the child development permit. So from master teacher up is site supervisor or program director. And that will be something that is determined as appropriate for the field placement for where the candidate is. We'll talk a little bit more about what those field placement settings are. So if you're thinking about that, you're thinking about Head Start, you're thinking about Title 22, we'll be covering that a little bit, but just know that depending on where your candidates are doing their clinical practice, you need to have your university supervisor holding an appropriate level of the permit. Or they need to have equivalent experience in the area of early childhood education. So that is something that you can determine. And it is something that as you go through, for instance, if you're submitting a new program for program review, initial program review, or when you get to program review as part of the 7-year cycle, this is information that we require as evidence. So we will at some point be asking to see how you have assured that your university or program supervisor or supervisors meet these minimum qualifications. Next slide, please. Now, we also need that you to ensure that your LEA or your center-based supervisors also have a minimum level of qualifications. Again, we just need to make sure that these candidates are being supported and supervised by qualified individuals. So at your LEA, your local education agency, your school site, your center-based clinical site, your supervisors there need to have a credential in one of the following areas that is listed here. So either a PK-3 ECE specialist instruction credential, which we realize no one has yet, or a multiple subject credential, or again, that master level teacher or higher permit. And then they also need to have a minimum of 3 years of experience. So these are not ors, these are ands. So they need to have that credential. They need to have a minimum of at least 3 years of experience teaching on one of those credentials. And then they need to demonstrate to you that they have exemplary teaching practices. So you will work with the employers to identify these appropriate supervisors at your school sites for your candidates. Next slide, please. Okay. In addition, these folks at the school sites that are going to be supporting your candidates in clinical practice, they need to be the teacher of record in the learning space where the candidate will be operating. Now, the exception you see here is if your candidate is in an intern program, because they are the teacher of record in that classroom. But for candidates who are doing clinical practice, like what we consider traditional student teaching in another teacher's classroom, we need to ensure that that teacher in that classroom is the teacher of record for that classroom. The teacher in that classroom needs to be provided with some kind of preparation or training or support from you at the program level, that they understand how to model planning, implementing, assessing, reflecting on learning experiences, because they're going to be working with that candidate of yours really, really closely. So we need to know that they know these things very well, so that they can be as supportive as possible for your candidates. They will be responsible for collaborating with your teacher candidates that are in their classrooms to incorporate the elements of your program. So again, this is where your university supervisor comes in very closely. They need to work very closely with these teachers so that the teachers are sort of aware of where your candidates are on track, so that they can be helping them with that sort of implementation of the things that they're learning in their program into these classrooms. So, we want it to be a process that is developmental and it's sequential and it's following along with what your candidates are learning. So you need these teachers in these classrooms to really understand the programs, the program standards, and what that arc of learning is for these candidates that are in their classrooms. And then finally, these folks will also contribute to the feedback and the formal observations. So really important triad: university supervisor, your local folks, working together very closely to support these candidates while they complete this really critical piece of their learning to become teachers in these spaces. Now, just one little caveat, it's not on the slide here. We know that some of the early learning spaces often have co-teachers. So if you are going to place a candidate for their clinical practice experience in a classroom that has co-teachers, you do have to ensure that both of the teachers in that classroom meet all of these qualifications, because those two teachers will be working together with that one candidate. So that will be an additional piece of requirement for you. So just for those co-teaching assignments. Okay, thank you. And I'll go ahead and pass it back to Debbie.
Thank you, Erin. So let's talk about the required supervisor training and some of the elements that programs are responsible to provide this training in. First of all, to ensure that the program supervisor is oriented to the program, is aware of the program, the needs of the program, and how the program operates is really important. In looking at the context of a specific pedagogy and instructional practices, being aware of those pieces within the program, knowing the context, the type of program, et cetera, is important. Also, training around the assessments that include the teaching performance assessment, the TPA, and also including training that looks at effective supervision techniques. For example, cognitive coaching, adult learning theory, to ensure that those practices are appropriate with the candidate as they are in those places. So the question has come up, and looking at what is a center-based facility. So as per the regulations or the codes from Title 22 that are currently in the proposed regulations, it is a center-based facility, a childcare center or daycare center of any capacity other than a family childcare home, and as that is defined in Title 22 and the appropriate section, in which less than 24-hour per day non-medical care and supervision are provided to children in a group setting. So that is the definition of a child-based facility. And then the requirements for placement settings. The elementary schools or the early childhood education settings need to demonstrate, first of all, a commitment to developmentally, culturally, and linguistically appropriate practices, and looking at as well to collaborate with families and guardians, which is an important part of early childhood practices, to making sure that the requirement of evidence-based practices and continuous program improvement is in place for the program. Having partnerships with the appropriate or other educational, social, and community resources or entities that support teaching and learning. And then also placing students with disabilities in the least restrictive environment, ensuring that those programs are currently implementing those practices, and then providing robust programs and support for English learners, that there are programs that support various learners in the classroom, and then reflecting to the extent possible that socioeconomic and cultural diversity of the community in which the program supports, and then is able to permit video capture for candidate reflection and TPA completion. That's an important element that programs must be able to provide. And that the program in their settings have the fully qualified administrator, if they are an elementary school, administrative credential is overseeing that program, and in early childhood settings, programs that are state funded under Title V meet those requirements for that program director, as well as Title 22 programs for director positions. So I'm going to hand it back over to Cheryl.
All right. So we just wanted to spend a moment to really think about the importance of clinical practice. It really is a focal point for the preparation program. So kind of what is expected. Obviously, this is really where the candidate will take what it learned through coursework, he or she's learned through coursework, and really apply it to the classroom and get an opportunity to be guided by those, both the program supervisor and by the local education agency veteran practitioner that they're working with in the classroom. So they're getting a chance to practice in a safe environment, to get some feedback, to get formative feedback, and to really kind of develop their practice. They will be planning, teaching, assessing, and reflecting on their learning experiences. How is it going? What could be done better? Those kinds of things. We talked a little bit about the formal observations, and those are required in the standards. 6 per semester or 4 per quarter, and they're focused on the teaching performance expectations. So the main thing that you have to remember in clinical practice is that candidates will have to demonstrate some proficiency level on all of the TPEs by the end of their program. Some of that will be done through the teaching performance assessment, and some of it will be done by your local assessments within your programs. So they need to have the opportunity to practice all of those areas. And so it'll be really important as you design the program to make sure that they have those opportunities. There are specific requirements for interns. And the interns must be supervised for 144 hours plus 45 in EL if they don't already have an EL authorization. So if they don't already hold another credential in some fashion. This is in regs. This is important. It's really critical. Now, what do we mean by the 144 hours? Does it mean that the person has, because the intern, remember, is a teacher of record, right? So they're in the classroom at the time. And so what do you count as those 600 hours of clinical practice, and what do you count as the 144 hours of supervision? And I'm going to quote our friend Jake Schuler, who's on here. It's really about practice that is bracketed by support. So if you have a candidate who's working with their program and saying, okay, tomorrow I'm going to be trying this lesson. They've had discussions with their program prior to that. They do the lessons, they do reflections, they meet again with their supervisor. How did it go? What's happening? Those hours can be counted as the supervised hours. The supervisor themselves does not need to be in the room 100% of the time. They need to be supported, bracketed by that support. With an intern, it's a little dicey because you cannot count all hours that they're in a classroom towards the 600 hours. It really needs to be those hours that are intentionally focused, designed by the program on particular aspects of their pedagogy. So many of you are familiar with this and have worked with intern programs for many years. So you're already aware of this. And if you haven't, you might want to reach out to one of those programs to say, how do you do it? How do you count those hours? Candidates must demonstrate they're proficient on the TPEs. The triad collaboration must be taking place. And the real debriefing, the reflection, the figuring out where am I strong? Where do I need some growth? Where should I have more practice? And of course, preparing for and completing the TPA within the clinical practice setting is important. Okay, next slide. This slide is just to kind of give a visual to what are the elements of clinical practice. So there's typically the early field work component, which is observations and reflections. And I know we had a question in the chat about can any part of the clinical practice be done in your coursework? Really, this early field work can be done in your coursework. So this is things that you might be able to build into coursework where you're sending somebody out to go look at a particular particular teacher because they model a really good way of teaching a particular aspect of what they're going to teach. The early student teaching and the final student teaching, and again, we have these in 3 different kind of buckets, but really, you're going to design your program to, however you design them. So it could be a whole year where this is blending into one another. We really don't mean it to be separate, but we wanted to let you know that there is the early field work, there's early student teaching, and then there's the final student teaching. So the early student teaching, of course, is sort of the first time they're actually placed in a classroom and they're doing small group, they're doing full class lessons, however you've designed it. And again, programs have a lot of autonomy as long as you're meeting the standards. So you have a lot of autonomy to think about how you want your candidates to experience your program. There needs to be some planning and debriefing with the program supervisor and mentor teacher. And then there's the final student teaching period of time. And that would require at some point full day planning and instruction, and the planning and the debriefing and the support from the supervisor and the mentor teacher continues to happen. But this is probably where you're going to do aspects of the TPA. You're also going to, there is a 4 weeks of full-time student teaching. So within that final student teaching must be the 4 weeks of full-time student teaching. So this is just to give you a visual, and again, just to stress that it can vary from program to program how you design your program, where they begin to do what. So what will be really important is that as you send in your program documentation, that we understand how you've designed your clinical practice experience for your candidates. All right, next slide. So let's talk for a moment about performance assessments, because this adds a little bit of complexity to the PK-3 credential. It's really important for you to look at Program Standard 6 as you design your clinical practice experience, because candidates must have those opportunities in their settings. So it's going to be something that you have to consider for every single candidate. So they'll need to complete their TPA and their PK-3 placement right now. So we're in a little bit of development period for the PK-3 TPA. And that means that for those of you that are coming in the next year or two, it's really important that you understand that the PK-3 TPA is not yet available. So there is the development timeline is going to impact how you place your candidates. So they are going to need to be able to do the current California grade level standards, because that is what they're going to be teaching to. And that the multiple subject TPA, remember, they're going to be having to take the multiple subject TPA until the PK-3 TPA is available. Once it's available, then it's probably not going to be as important as to how you design their placement. But if you can make sure that they are in a TK-3 placement at the time they're going to take their TPA, at least for the next couple of years, it's really important. So after July 1 of 2025 is when the new the literacy performance assessment comes into play. It must be done by then. Statute requires it. So we're strongly advising you, as you think about it, to design your programs so that candidates complete cycle 1 in math and cycle 2 in literacy. Right now, the issue is that it's a candidate choice as to what, for multiple and single subject, it's a candidate choice as to when they do which cycle. But because the literacy performance assessment comes into play in July 1 of 2025, and cycle 2 will be literacy then, that it behooves you right now to structure your program so it's aligned with that, so it doesn't become complicated. So the biggest thing is make sure that your programs are following all of the things that those candidates need. So they become familiar with what is going to be required in the TPA. You know, how many students, who's visible, what kind of documentation do I need from the school, the sign-offs, that you may need an English learner student and a student with disability. There are very specific requirements. There are resources slides, or there's resources available to you to become familiar. If you haven't become familiar, they are on one of the last slides for resources. We've added them. Those are for multiple and single subject, and those documents will also be created by the performance assessment team for the PK-3 performance assessment when it's done. The other piece to this is a TPA coordinator is really critical. Because that role, we suggest that you have somebody be the formal TPA coordinator so that you are really aware and working with that person on clinical practice so that this is really seamless for candidates.
Cheryl, I see a little glitch here too, and I think we switched this, so I apologize.
This
is not. So it is not a teacher performance assessment.
That's
Cheryl,
right.
do you want to share that with everybody?
It's the teaching performance assessment. We are not, yes, it's very important that it's teaching performance expectations and teaching performance assessment, not teacher. And we did make that change
on the
this
slides,
morning.
everybody.
Apparently
Sorry about that. We saw it and it was like, oh, so sorry. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that. All right, next slide. Where are we? Okay. So let's talk about considerations for internships. Okay, so this is really important for both internships and residencies, or any types of clinical practice that you have created where a candidate is in a single setting for the whole year. So an intern, let's talk about interns. They are a person, remember, teaching on an intern document that's issued by the commission. They are teacher of record. And what's really important, if you're not familiar with interns, is that they are to be used where a fully credentialed teacher is not available to fill that vacancy. So that is a really critical part. You can't just put an intern in any space. State law says there is a hiring hierarchy. The hiring hierarchy says that students must have a fully credentialed teacher. And if one is not available and the local education agency has done all it can to find a fully qualified person, they may put in an intern. So that's a really important piece. If you have an intern program, then it's really important to know that 600 hours cuts across every type. All candidates must have the 600 hours regardless of what pathway they are in. So that includes the intern programs. So again, just want to highlight the fact that there is specific supervision hour requirements of 144 hours plus 45 hours that are specific about EL instruction. It's ultimately the responsibility of the program, so the commission approved program, to make sure that candidates have the required experience. Now, what is different about the intern and what's challenging about it is, remember the early slide about 200 hours in various settings. So in PK-TK and then K3. So we need to have a total of 600, and it has to include at least 200 in PK-TK, 200 hours in K3, and 200 hours across either one of these. So if someone is in an intern position and they're in a classroom, they're gonna be probably needing one of these. Let's say they're in a kindergarten classroom. They're in a kindergarten classroom. They're going to probably very clearly make the 400 hours in there because they're in there as the teacher record full time. But they're going to need 200 more hours in a setting that's outside of their own classroom. That is a challenge, we understand, for interns, but that is a requirement of this credential. And so the program needs to figure out how do we make that happen for these candidates. We would like you to try to figure out and work with your partners to figure out whether a candidate can get those hours within those contracted hours so that they're not having to do something more. If that is at all, that would be ideal. That's the ideal thing. Can we have a candidate released for a day a week to get those other 200 hours? Can you hire 2 interns that maybe then at some point are able to swap positions or at least serve in each other's classroom for a period of time? So there's a number of ways that this can happen. For many, many years, this was how multiple subject programs worked. And that was changed a few years back. But this is a requirement within this particular credential. This was a recommendation from the panel, and it was approved by the commission, and it is in the regs. So what we don't want you to do is put this on the backs of the candidate to figure out how to do this. We really need the programs to be thoughtful about it and to think about how can we make this happen and work with your employing agencies. All right, next slide. All right, next one. All right. Now, residencies have grown in popularity intentionally because we do think that they are really strong models for student teaching pathways. It's really important. Again, the clinical practice minimum requirement applies to all candidates regardless of the pathway. So 600 hours. And again, these are candidates who are student teachers now in a classroom all year in the same classroom, 50% of the time at least. They could be co-coaching with another veteran practitioner, but they are not the teacher of record. So they are a student teacher. They are in there 50% of the time. And so that does leave opportunities for the candidates to complete the additional 200 hours in another grade level. So they're in the same classroom, but they need to still get that other 200 hours in a different grade level that complies with the requirements. So again, just focusing on the commission approved program has the responsibility to ensure candidates have that required placement and experience, and it can't be left up to the candidate to determine. So it really has to be thoughtfully designed. It also has to be tracked. So for both the interns and for the residencies and for all candidates, we need to know how the program is keeping track that every candidate has gotten their appropriate 200 hours in each of the settings. So we will be looking for that kind of data and the kind of tracking forms that you all are having to make sure that candidates are fully prepared in the way that the commission has requested. It's really important. We have a lot of grants out there, so there is technical assistance is available. We have people who specialize very much in residencies. We also have a new statewide residency partner. And so there's a lot of resources out there for people who want to design residency programs. And we're happy to talk to you about that further. Okay, next slide.
All right, so this is Rosemary again, and I'm back with one of the biggest questions that we've had regarding the PK-3 ECE specialist instruction credential, and that is the area of equivalency for clinical practice. And you'll note that this is there are really stringent requirements for this because equivalency is taking place of your intentional clinical practice program. And so really we want programs to be very thoughtful in considering how they can maintain the coherence of the program as they're granting equivalency for these candidates. It is unique to this credential. None of our other credentials have this. And it has been made available for early childhood professionals and those who have completed practicum hours as a way of acknowledging the true and real experience and expertise they're bringing from those experiences. We can only grant equivalency for the pre-K and TK portion of clinical practice. Candidates will still need to complete a minimum of 200 hours in the K-3. Their experience must have been with 3 and 4-year-olds. This is infant toddler will not qualify for this equivalency. And please note the criteria that's outlined in the regulations, and it's in the handbook. For option 1, there's no partial credit, and I'll go into that in just a moment. And there are no substitutions. So if it doesn't say it in the precondition as it's listed in the handbook, the answer is no, you cannot use that. And there is a maximum of 400 hours of clinical practice equivalency, no matter what, for the PK-TK. So if candidates come in and they combine the two options and they have more than 400 hours that they want to apply, they cannot apply more than 400. So next slide, and we'll talk about the two different options. Now, the first option is labeled the professional equivalency for clinical practice. And this is where we're acknowledging the work of early childhood educators who have already invested a great amount of time into their teaching. The candidate must have one of the following: a child development permit at the teacher level or higher, or have been a lead teacher in a Head Start program, or be a lead teacher in a child care and development center serving preschool aged children. In addition to that, at that level, they have to have completed 6 years or more of satisfactory full-time teaching as a lead teacher in a public or private center-based childcare and development program serving preschool age children that is either license exempt or hold a license defined as in Title 22. And the candidate needs to provide written verification. There isn't a timeliness on this, but they have to be able to provide proof that they have completed that with those stipulations. And for our equivalency consideration, we're counting full-time being a classroom-based teaching for at least 3 hours per day for at least 75% of the school year. And so that's the first part of this equivalency option. So let's go to the next one. So as I was saying, that the candidate needs to provide verification from the employer confirming that the teacher did a satisfactory or better job using developmentally appropriate teaching strategies for preschool age children and has a deep knowledge of early literacy, early math, and other preschool subjects, and the use of developmentally appropriate teaching and learning approaches that engage students and promote student understanding. The candidate also needs to demonstrate the ability to establish and maintain developmentally appropriate standards and expectations for students' behavior, plan and implement a sequence of appropriate learning activities that include both child and teacher initiated, evaluate and assess student learning outcomes, and communicate effectively with younger children and their families and guardians, remembering that this is about the whole community and the whole child. So there's one more slide about this equivalency option, so let's go to that one. As I mentioned earlier, there's no partial credit for this. If a candidate has completed 5.5 years and met all those other criteria, we cannot grant the equivalency. The program must grant a candidate that meets all of the options criteria at least the 200 hours of equivalency for PK-TK, and may, at their discretion, grant up to another 200 hours of equivalency. So let's say you have a candidate who walks in your door and they've been teaching for 10 years and they've run their own center-based program. It's at the program, your discretion, if you would like to grant them additional hours. However, it's the maximum number of equivalency hours would be 400. And so let's go to the second option. So the second option is a lot more straightforward. And although it's straightforward, but it's very specific. So the second option is for candidates who've completed a practicum in their, most likely in their undergraduate programs. It needs to be a practicum that is aligned with either the CID for community colleges or the equivalent articulation information for a CSU, UC, or independent institution. So it cannot just be any coursework that a candidate has done. It needs to be specifically a practicum and incorporate the elements as listed, and that CID is linked so that you can see what those components are. It must have been completed at a regionally accredited institute of higher ed. So it's not like professional development hours. It needs to be part of a credit-bearing and degree applicable course. It needs to have been completed in a preschool or ECE setting serving 3 to 4-year-old children and supervised by a trained faculty member or instructor with expertise in ECE child development pedagogy. And it needs to, like all other elements of clinical practice, include observation, feedback, and reflection. The candidates need to have earned a grade of C or better, or the equivalent, and the candidate will need to provide their transcripts. And finally, equivalency is granted commensurate with the number of practicum hours up to a total of 200. So these are two distinct equivalency options. So we have the professional one and we have the practicum one. So any combination of those can be granted, but no more than a total of 400 hours between the two. And I think I just stepped on Cheryl's slides. So I'm sorry about that. But yeah, but one question has come up, and it I don't know, maybe in the chat while I was talking, but it's come up in the past. Do you have to complete option 1 in order to get option 2? No, you don't. You may, but these are two distinct options. So just to clarify that little bit, and then I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl.
Okay, so with these options, just remember that 600 hours is the minimum requirement for clinical practice. Programs can always require more. That's sort of our mantra. Is like if you know you are a program that have a feel like that your candidates need to do 800 hours. That is a program decision. But 600 hours is the minimum. Candidates who have completed their minimum clinical practice hours, it's really important to know that they have to complete all program requirements. Okay, so let's say they're in a position, they've checked the box that they have 600 hours. You've all confirmed that they've done their clinical practice hours, but they're not done with the TPA. The TPA requires they be in a setting in order to complete. So they're going to have to do more hours until they're able to complete all of the requirements. So I think it's really important for you to let candidates have a really clear understanding that they have to be in settings regardless of our minimum requirement until they are done with the program, so that there isn't any sort of pushback to say, well, I've already done that. Now I just want to do my TPA on the side. Those kinds of things. It's really important for you to be really clear with candidates about what that 600 hours means and what those other requirements are that sort of interplay with the clinical practice component. And again, as Rosemary mentioned, they can qualify for one or both or neither of the equivalencies. So that is really important for you to understand that those are distinct. Together, they can only get 400, so they must do another 200 in your program at minimum. And then it's really important for the institution to design a cohesive program that incorporates intentional clinical practice that integrates the program content and the pedagogy. One of the things that we've seen with some of the early submissions is that the focus seems to be on these clinical practice equivalency processes instead of our core program is 600 hours and how are we going to get that done? So these are sort of exceptions that can be made for people. We want to recognize the important role they've played all these years and recognize the experience and expertise that they bring to the table. While at the same time, you may have the brand new candidate that has never taught before. And so your program needs to be designed around the 600 hours with an understanding that those who qualify for these clinical practice equivalency models must get those equivalencies. Again, make sure when you go through that as you develop candidate materials that everything's accurate and complete. You have website information, you have training materials, you have handbooks so that it's really clear to candidates and to everybody looking at your program what's required around these clinical practice requirements and the equivalencies. And then ultimately, you're responsible for ensuring the candidates are prepared to be effective in the classroom and that they are completing all the program requirements. So before you can recommend them, they have to have done everything. Okay, next slide. Okay, just a reminder, only can get 400 hours of equivalency for PK-TK. And it's only for those settings. It's not for the other settings that they may have done practicum in. It's only for the PK-TK. And must complete at least 200 hours in a K-3 placement. They have to complete all required coursework and assessments. And they have to, if they are an intern, they're going to have to still serve until they are done. They have to have their formal observations, they have to complete coursework, and they have to complete assessments. So again, we've gotten questions about, okay, they only have 200 hours to do, but they're an intern. Okay, remember, interns are sort of on a contractual basis, just like any other teacher of record. They're in a classroom. So you're going to have to keep that in mind. They're going to probably, until they finish everything, they may do well over 200 hours in their intern program. And then the program retains the authority and responsibility for recommending the candidates. So we need to make sure that they're in appropriate placements, and it's the responsibility of the program that that if there are issues, that it be corrected by the program. Okay, next slide.
Okay, so thank you so much, Cheryl. And we really have been getting so many questions about the equivalency. So if you still have questions, please keep asking them. We know it is complex, so that's what we're here for. That's literally our job, is to help you navigate these as you're developing your program. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm part of the initial program review team. It's IPR is the term you'll see used a lot. And at this point, most of you are probably interacting with us if you're thinking about having a program because we're your first stop. The IPR is a peer review process. So we are staff of the commission. We are not the people giving you the feedback on your program standards and your program design. It is your peers in the teacher preparation and educator preparation field. So these are reviewed by people who also, faculty, instructors, administrators who also work in educator preparation programs. We have step-by-step instructions on our page submitting a proposal for a new educator preparation program in California. They're very specific. Again, if you are running into terminology that is new to you, please ask questions. Our team, there are 3 of us on the team, and we are happy to meet with you to talk about your specific problem, or your program, and to help you understand what the requirements are. So I'm not going to go deep into that right now, but I'm going to refer you to that page. It's also in our resources. When you get the PDF of this slideshow, you will be able to click right there on that and go to the website. But we are more than happy to meet with you, and there are real humans that answer your emails. We do our best to answer them within a day or two. But if you'll give us a little space, if it's a little longer, it's because we're trying to get the right answer to your question, so we give you clear guidance. So I'll pass it on to Bronwyn.
Thank you, Rosemary. All right, everybody take a deep breath. We've given you so much information today. Oh my gosh. Take a deep breath. We're recording all of your questions. Don't worry, we're going to get to them, I promise. So resources, we have lots of resources for you. I'm going to drop them in the chat for you in just a minute, but we have the CTC PK-3 ECE Specialist Instruction Credential page. That's going to be the page where you're going to find all the information about anything you want to know about the new credential coming out. That page also has the handbook. That's going to be your guide. You're going to want that. Print that out, highlight it, tab it, bookmark it, all the things. You're going to really, really want that. That is going to be something that you're going to look forward to when you're doing your programs and making the clinical practice for your programs. The clinical practice guide for this credential is also there. The performance assessment guide is something to look at. Your faculty policies and resources for performance assessment. And if you have not already, why not? You need to subscribe to our ECE news and our PSD news. Very, very, very good things come out in both of those. We have lots of opportunities for you to join us in all sorts of fun and exciting things. Lots of grants information come out in that, and anything new and exciting that we're doing. And bonus, as soon as this credential is approved and ready to go, it's going to be in those news blasts. So you're going to want to be a part of that. And I'll drop those all those links in the chat for you too. Connecting with us is very, very easy. As Rosemary said, real people answer these emails. We're not robots, and we try to answer them all in a matter of just usually the same day, if not a couple of days. The IPR team can be reached at ipr@ctc.ca.gov. If questions need to be answered or you have specific scenarios that you want to talk about, it is best to usually make a one-on-one time with the IPR team. The office hours are brand new to IPR. Those are the first Wednesdays and third Wednesdays of the month from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. And if you have an ECE question about the credential, when it comes out, any questions or anything else ECE related, our team also, real people, answer the email, ece@ctc.ca.gov. And we also have office hours. And both of these office hours are come as you are. They're nothing formal about them. They're very relaxed. Ours are particularly during lunchtime, but so is IPR, really, kind of depending on when you eat. You can bring your lunch. You can have your camera off. You don't even have to have a question. You could just come and learn from others. We have lots of people that just come and want to just maybe learn, and maybe there's a question they hadn't thought of and then it's answered. So I encourage you, we all encourage you to come to either of those. And then if you have specific certification questions, that we encourage you to reach out to the career guidance at ctc.ca.gov. And once again, I will put all of those links in the chat if you want to grab them right away. But we will also have, these are all clickable links when you get your PDF copy of this too.
Bronwyn, can I go off script here real quick?
Yes, Erin.
I'm sorry that I didn't notice this before, as we've gone through these slides so many times, everyone, to make sure that they have all the information that you need. And we also have a weekly PSD e-news that you can sign up for. And especially if you're new to working with the commission, I really encourage you to sign up for that e-news. So you sign up for it, it'll come to your inbox every Friday at 3:30, something like that. It has a variety of information in it. So, you may need to get familiar with, okay, looking, if you want to just look for just your PK-3 things. But for instance, some of the questions that have come up today were around the teaching performance assessment. We have a whole section on the e-news about the teaching performance assessment, what's going on there, and pilot opportunities to participate in. But we also, right now, the commission is managing a number of great grants. And so again, if you're new, you might want to be really watching for some of that grant information if you're not familiar with it. So I just think the e-news it's broader. These are all very focused. The other resource, very focused. Oh, it is right there. So we did have it on a slide and I just got out of order. Anyway, just really wanted to encourage everyone to sign up for that. Sorry.
Erin, I put the direct link in the chat so that way people can just click it. It'll take them right to the website on the CT or the page on the CTC website. So that way they can join directly. And I used to always, like, to me, the PSD news was the way I would end my week, especially as faculty. like, okay, 3:30 on Friday, let's see what's going on. Let's see what's grants are available. Let's, see all these different pieces. So if people are not on, definitely they should join. Sorry to chime in there, Erin.
All right. We move into questions?
Yeah, and
All
so
right.
I think we've gotten now to the point where that everybody's been waiting for, and there have been some great questions in the chat. And before we even go to the questions, I wanted to, we use the term certification about reaching out to certification. And if you're not familiar with that, so if a candidate or you have a specific question about credentialing, about what's required to get the credential, we'll often guide you to the certification department, because that's a little bit different than what we're doing here.
Rosemary, can I just share where we are with the regulations process?
Oh,
and
that
getting
we
this
would
program?
love to hear where we are with the regulations. Thank you.
So some of you are wondering when we can approve new programs, and we can't approve a new program until the regulations have passed. So the process of promulgating regulations is sort of a back and forth with the Office of Administrative Law, and we are sort of we're ready. The commission just approved some of the changes that the attorney at the Office of Administrative Law asked us to make, some clarifying language. It was all language based. No substantive changes were asked to be made to the credential, which is great. But they did have some clarifying language. The commission approved that language at the last meeting last week. And we are packaging that information specifically as what's required, and it will be going over to the Office of Administrative Law, I'm going to say by probably sometime next week at the latest. They have 30 days to review it. 30 working days. So we know we've got holidays in there. So 30 working days. And so at the end of that 30 working days, they will tell us whether or not they have approved the regulations package, or whether they continue to have questions and that we have to address. So that's where we're at right now. And so we're hoping by sometime mid-January, third week of January, we'll know for sure whether we can give the go button on some of these programs that are waiting for approval.
Cheryl, I know too, the ECE team, we also have a ECE newsletter that we send out just usually one time a month, unless there's like an emergency item. And we are committed, like the second we get that word, there's going to be an ECE news blast that goes out the moment we can. So we'll put that in the chat. So if there's anybody who's not on the ECE newsletter, please definitely join us, because we want to get that. Trust me, all of us are sitting here waiting too, like, anxiously, excitedly waiting.
Yep.
Well, and I'll throw my IPR hat in the ring here too. So once the regulations are approved, then any programs that have completed the IPR process will be put forth to the commission on accreditation, or committee on accreditation, excuse me. And that abbreviation is COA. So if you're getting email back and we're saying like, it'll go to the COA. So the Committee on Accreditation will then review those submissions after that whole peer review process has happened. So that is why people have been submitting program proposals, even though the regulations have not yet been approved. So if your institution is in the IPR process and you're getting feedback from the reviewers, please respond to it at your earliest convenience so that we can continue the process and have those programs queued up for the Committee on Accreditation. So, all right, so you all have been submitting some really great questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Bronwyn, who's been collecting those, and she's gonna read them, and then we have each of us, one of us will be answering or responding to those. So
thank you, Rosemary. Okay, we have several questions here that you've been asking in the chat. If you have a few more, go ahead and put them in the chat. If we get to them today, that would be awesome. If we don't get to them, please know that we will reach out to you individually, someone from our team member, or if you have a specific situation, we encourage you to email one of those email boxes that we put in the chat so that we can either meet with your team or meet with you individually to talk about a specific scenario that you may have. We're kind of looking today for general questions that the whole group could benefit from. So we're going to start with Helen Davis had her first question, and then Cheryl, we're going to pass this over to you. And we answered it in the chat, but I wanted to answer it again live just so that if anybody else had this question, we make sure that's answered. Can the observations be hybrid, some in person and some online?
Absolutely. So you can design your observations however you want, as long as there is it's actually happening, that the program is also, making sure that the candidate's doing reflection with their supervisors, their program supervisor at the program, and in their mentors. But absolutely, yes, those can be they can be via video, they can be however you design them. This is particularly helpful in rural areas, in areas that's really hard for the program to get to. So absolutely. And it is one of the things we learned during the pandemic that can work. Many of you have employed that process during COVID. So absolutely.
Thank you, Cheryl. And so our next question is going to go to Rosemary. Denise Burbach. 6 formal observations from the instructor is almost impossible in rural areas. Can some formal observations be done through video?
That is a great question. And I think Cheryl partially answered that in her response. And also, yes, they still have the 6 formal observations, or the average of if you have a 2-semester program, you need to have a total of 12 observations by the end of it, right? And remembering that the instructors, in general, instructors are not the ones going out to do the observations. It's the university or program supervisor. So one solution to that is to have university supervisors who are closer to those schools. I've been a university supervisor, so I used to get sent to the ones that were closer to my house. So it is definitely a logistical item that the program needs to design. But if necessary, a hybrid, a video observation, as long as it's incorporating those components. I am one of those supervisors who supervised very remotely during COVID, and it was not the same, clearly, but we still did the planning, observed the lesson, had a conference, and then reflected and provided feedback. So as long as it is a true representation of what the candidates are doing, if you need to go to that, it's an option.
Yeah, at the community college level for practicum, we currently do 6, but 3 to 4
and so this is
are on video.
Yeah, and so clinical practice is part of the actual educator preparation program. So it's less likely that this is going to be happening at the community college unless it's part of an integrated program where you're partnered with an institution that's offering an educator preparation program.
We are, so we will be. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Ron, when you're muted.
Sorry. Erin, next question goes to you. Tometa Shaw would like to know, can the LEA and university supervisor be the same person if they work at the field site?
Where's my mute? Oh, I am unmuted. That's an interesting question. I'm not sure that really is keeping in the spirit of the whole triad experience. We want somebody who is really working in the preparation program to be that university supervisor. And then the person who is in the classroom with your candidate during clinical practice is someone else. So there's not a prohibition against it, but it's not keeping with the spirit of what we're looking for in that triad of support for the candidates.
Thank you, Erin. And Erin, you also have the next question. This is from Andrea Delgado. Can clinical practice hours be done through coursework?
Oh, we talked a little bit about this, and I know we talked about it up in the chat a few times. So clinical practice is often there's often a unit within your program will be like clinical practice. So in terms of, are they going to be earning, some kind of credits in your program for it? That's not out of the ordinary. And in fact, some of the early field experiences are absolutely part of coursework, right? Sending them out for observations and things like that. And again, Cheryl covered this. So, but clinical practice, like their student teaching and their times taking what they've learned in the program and actually putting it into practice is an experience that they need to be having in a classroom setting with real live kids and real live students. So I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but hopefully we've gotten at that answer for you. Jake, did you lean in? Did you want to say something?
Just any peer-to-peer sort of like model teaching within a course is not considered something that would count towards the 600. There were some flexibilities during the early parts of the COVID pandemic where some of those things were on the table, but at this point, it's still, as you said, Aaron, it's interaction with students, with, PK through 12 students. It would not count for peer-to-peer sort of practice model lessons within a course. But like you said, early field experiences, a lot of times it's something within a course, but it requires you to go out to work with kids. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, Rosemary, 2 questions for you. The first one comes from Denise Burbach. How do community colleges hire a TPA coordinator?
Okay, so as I mentioned before, if you're working with, first of all, for the undergraduate, if it's not part of an integrated teacher prep or educator preparation program, you wouldn't need to have a TPA coordinator. If you are working with an institution of higher education that has an educator preparation program, they likely have someone already identified in that role for the other kinds of preparation programs that they're offering, for example, a multiple subject or single subject. And so it would seem to me, and Cheryl and Aaron, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that would seem to be that decision that the institution the program sponsor is making. So it's unlikely they would need to be at the community college.
That's correct. It would be within your teacher preparation program, whatever that part of the program is. And if you are already offering a multiple single subject, you're going to have probably a TPA coordinator already
or ed specialists even.
Right. Or ed specialists
who
already are familiar with it. And it probably is most advantageous to use them because they already understand it. It's extremely complicated. And but it would not be within the community colleges. I don't see that as being where that person would be placed.
And then this kind of a follow-up question to that from Janice Jeffries. Who is the point person to contact for community colleges to ask clarifying questions?
As far as, that's a great question because we are working a lot with the community colleges in this credential because you are core to getting our candidates prepared with the subject matter in particular. And we know there's deep expertise there. And quite frankly, you can reach out. I know that the ECE team has been communicating a lot with the community colleges. Some of us have very strong ties to those from our past. So you're welcome to contact the IPR team if you have questions about developing a program, or like what Denise has indicated here is that they're working with a program sponsor, another institution. So if it's about program design, it just really depends. And quite frankly, if you send a question to the IPR team and we don't know the answer, and we know that the ECE team does, we share that, so again, there are humans here answering your emails, and we'll do our best to get you the best answer, even if you send it to us and we don't know it. So hopefully, I guess that's a long way of saying either the IPR or the ECE emails are a good way to reach us.
Thank you. And then Cheryl, Rebecca Wardlaw wants to know if there is a CSET requirement if the degree is not ECE or child development.
Rebecca, I see you. No, there is not a CSET requirement. The subject matter here was built differently than the other credentials. It is one of those 9 degree requirements or 24 units in child development or early childhood education. So that is the the subject matter requirement. I do not believe that there have not been any discussions that I've been a part of, or have heard from, about the desire to build a CSET exam for this this credential.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, we have lots of other questions coming in. I'm trying to field them. Thank you very much for your patience. Okay.
There was a question earlier, Bronwyn, while you're looking, there was a
Yeah.
question earlier about expectations for the TPA, because I believe it was Cheryl in one of her slides was saying we don't currently have a TPA that covers all of the possible teaching settings for PK-3. So right now your candidates are going to have to complete that in their TK through 3 setting. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an update on that. First, just to be clear, the commission is not developing a PK-3 specific TPA. So if you're waiting for something to come out that's the PK-3 TPA, this is not what's happening in that space. So right now we have 2 cycles for Cal TPA. So Cal TPA is developed by the commission. There's also an Ed TPA out there that's been approved by the commission. And then there's an assessment at CSU Fresno that's been approved by the commission. But for our own development purposes, we are working on modifying both cycles. So there's 2 cycles, cycle 1 and cycle 2 of our Cal TPA. Cycle 1 is going to have that math component in it. And cycle 2 is where this new literacy performance assessment is going to occur. That's going to eventually take over for the RECA. So right now, as Cheryl mentioned, the literacy performance assessment has to be in place pursuant to statute by July 1 of 2025. So we're on track for rolling that out by July 1 of 2025, and actually currently are working on getting some institutions to help pilot that. And I know that our TPA folks, our performance assessment folks, are not here, but they are anxiously awaiting the passing of the regulations, the approval of some PK-3 programs, because they really would like some of you folks who have the new approved PK-3 programs to please participate in this pilot, because those are going to be some key candidates that we would love to have help pilot this new literacy performance assessment. And then cycle 1, which again, I said was going to have that math in it. My understanding is that development will also start in 2024 to start aligning the PK-3 TPEs for the cycle 1. And that will also be field tested and will likely come online sometime in 2025. So as I mentioned earlier, when I mentioned the e-news and got all enthusiastic about it, there is a whole section in the e-news about performance assessment. And so there are office hours that they hold as well, and announcements about pilot opportunities and things like that will be there. So please be looking for updates and information on performance assessment updates in that section of the e-news.
Thank you so much, Erin. So we do have a question about formal observations. So I'm going to turn this over either to Rosemary or Cheryl. Do you need to have the 6 formal observations per semester for both the early student teaching and the final student teaching?
Yes, it's 6 per semester, regardless of where you are in your clinical practice.
Thank you, Cheryl.
And so some people were asking in earlier emails before about, like, say somebody ends up not having to do like an entire semester or 2 semesters of clinical practice because of the equivalencies or because of where they're at in the program. You still have to have the equivalent it's not simple math. You can't take, okay, this person only needs 200 hours of clinical practice and we're supposed to have 6 formal observations, therefore they only need 2 observations. You have to be supporting them all the way through until they're done. So as if they were doing a full year, basically. So I know that's a little complicated and it's complicated to explain, but you should be giving them the entire program for as long as they're in the program. Does that make sense? I don't know if I am explaining that very well, Rosemary, but I know you've dealt with this issue as well, but yes.
I'm gonna let that go with
Okay.
Rosemary, do you mind sharing with everybody an update with a slide deck? Because we want to make a few little just adjustments on those like like,
No, yeah, the adjustments are there, but we want to make sure we send you the correct deck. So what we're going to do is email it out as soon as we get the emails downloaded from the Zoom report. And they're ready to go. I just want to make sure you get the one where I fix the typos that I made. I am accepting responsibility for my errors. So we're not trying to hide it from you or anything, and we will send that out. And then as soon as we process this video and get it captioned and everything, this will be posted along with the slide deck on the PK-3 ECE Credential website. And then also, like Renee mentioned, our next project, as soon as we wrap the webinar, is to get those FAQs updated, and we will be including questions from this webinar too, that especially the ones we didn't get to answer. So we appreciate your patience with us as we do that.
And can I jump to Jake? Can I ask you to, so Jake has a little clarification on what I was making complicated. So Jake, can you jump in real quick?
Oh, no problem. There I am. As far as 6 observations per semester, if the candidate is in like just an early fieldwork part of a program, and they're not in any way leading either small groups or large groups of students, or depending on the setting for the context they're in, right? But if they are just completely observing and in a very early fieldwork portion, it probably makes sense that they're not having formal observations yet from a university supervisor. But if you have a structure where you have like an initial student teaching or an early student teaching, whatever you're calling it, and then a secondary student teaching or final, for all of those experiences where the candidate is involved in really leading any part or able to be observed in some way, then the program should start observations. So, and feel free to reach out to us if you have questions on kind of how that looks for your particular structure of program. Because I've talked to many programs about how they kind of set that up. And even in an early semester, it may be that the first month there's no observations, but the last month or two, they're doing them because there is a meaningful way to do those observations.
thank you, everybody, for
Yeah.
your patience. We're looking at the questions on the back side right now, trying to see who's going to fit, like the questions that are remaining. We're trying to see who would be the best responder for each one. So, Rosemary, do you have one that we can respond to at this point?
Okay, well, Edmundo asked if clinical practice can be paid. And that is a great question for our grants team. So there are residency grants out there that are available, but as far as and so that's something that a program can make as their decision.
There's no prohibition against your candidates getting paid during clinical practice.
Exactly.
And we're moving to an
Yeah.
earn and learn model, and we see a lot of apprenticeships, a lot of kind of different opportunities for people to not have to go into massive debt while you're working on your teacher preparation. I think it's great that there's wonderful opportunities available.
I would add to that, Edmundo, it looks like you're still on that. They're just, if they're in an aide position or any other position where there's, they have a contract to fulfill, specific requirements for their employer, then we'd want to see that you had a real understanding with the employer of them, being able to do that part while also fulfilling all program requirements. So making sure there's sign off from the employer that they're really doing both things.
All right, should we take one more question? Because we're at 11:28 and that sound about right? Okay. What question do you guys want to pose? There's so many.
There's so many
Wow.
good ones. I'm wondering, Cheryl, is it possible to respond to Denise? She was asking about OAL and if additional comments can be made. I'm scrolling back because I want to make sure I have the right wording on hers.
Oh, yes. Okay.
It was at 11:11, her comment.
Right.
Question.
There are actually, at this time, no, there's no opportunity. If the Office of Administrative Law does not approve these and has some issues, we will, and that we have to address, we have to go back out for a 15-day notice, and there'll be another opportunity at that time. But right now, no, the notice did go out publicly. We followed all the regular protocols for the 15-day notice. And at this time around, we did not receive any comments, I believe. Yeah, so just keep watching. We'll see what the Office of Administrative Law says. And again, I think I just want to emphasize, this is the first push out of the gate for this credential. As we begin to work with this credential, as you all begin to work with this credential, we have lots of opportunities to tweak it, to make changes, to improve it, to really respond to what the need is out there and how you all think that it needs to be changed or updated or improved. So it's not that this is set in stone forever and ever and ever. We can always make changes. There's just a process that follows, the public vetting, going to the commission, if additional regulations are needed, those kinds of things. So your normal process.
Well, with that, everybody, we are at 11:30. For those, I hope some who are on right now are going to be able to take a breath the next couple weeks, maybe have a little bit of time to just relax and reflect and maybe spend time with family or friends. I'm looking forward to that myself. I do want to share, though, we will have staff on almost every single day. So we will be checking our ECE email, but if you don't hear from us for like a day or two, don't worry. If anybody's out, we'll let you know, but we should have contact most of the days during the holiday. But please know, we absolutely know there's more questions in the chat. Bronwyn has been diligently collecting every single question. Our goal is to be as transparent as possible. And so we will do our best to answer those questions. We also invite you, if anybody's around next week, we've got, I almost said happy hour, office hours. We have happy office hours coming up on Tuesday and Wednesday next week. So hopefully we will see some of you then. Everybody have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you so much for being together today. And thank you just in partnership and solidarity. Take care of everybody. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.